the ultimate thing is creating something new from scratch. And as you can see, and this is where I want to show you where we have like this overlapping of a super reality. Welcome to the ReeThink podcast. Today I have a little different episode for you prepared. It's a follow-up podcast episode of the last one where I wanted to follow up on certain things that were already discussed, because I came across a couple of things that was super intriguing for me to see and also to put into, let's say, all my understanding so far. And I thought it's a great opportunity to share it with you. Today we will cover a lot of topics. It's about Bloom's taxonomy. Just so far, it's a pyramid of ways of thinking or levels of thinking. And it's very intriguing because I came across this before, I think, 3 podcasts ago. And I was very resonating with this framework. It's very interesting to see. And it ties also really great together with what was discussed, for instance, with Lisa about NeuroWell. I came across new information about AI, and it puts in perspective. There's a hype going on the one hand. On the other hand, I think there is like a genuine threat of AI, but for me, something clicked in a way that I see more clearly what particular thing is really important in order to develop, to have, like, let's say, a hedge against AI. However, there's also like a positive side to that as well. Then I go back to flow and trauma. I dig a bit deeper into the paper I got from Steven Kotler and Michael. So Michael was also on the podcast, so that was super interesting. And I wanted to share these details with you as well. I think the underlying principle, in case you missed this, is that the flow consciousness is able to have a effect or a positive effect on brain plasticity. And this means also it can have a positive effect when you have something like depression or PTSD. And in that paper, it's really explained where the similarities are, and also a combination with psychedelics. It's very intriguing and super interesting to share with you. And then I have some updates also through a research paper that I came across to Jonathan Haidt. Jonathan Haidt is doing some amazing work in the whole field of attention crisis. So every topic that we already discussed in terms of what it does, like social media in combination with smartphones, what it does with your brain, in particular with children and adolescents. And one of the great things is that he provided, like, let's say, the research framework to prove there's not only a correlation, but also a causation. And very interesting is that he published together with a researcher colleague of his a really great article that lies this out. But if you want to go deeper into that, I really highly recommend the book Anxious Generation of Jonathan Haidt. But I have to warn you in that sense that if you are parents in particular, it's a hard pill to swallow, because there are also like stories, evidential stories laid out, and they are sometimes really hard to comprehend in the scale of what happened with our children. So we will dig into that. And to wrap this whole podcast up. So let's start with the first topic. I like to share my screen so you have a bit of a visual for that. So, and Bloom's taxonomy is basically, as I said, like a framework of different layers of thinking. And it's built like a pyramid because it means that you have to master a certain step before you can master the next one. And the interesting thing is that we can see remember, understanding, and applying. These are like the basic things that we can say most of the time schools are in that area. Of course, analyzing, you can see that as well. but the highest levels are very particular, and there's a lot of like deep thinking going on in order to really get into the highest levels. And maybe you remember in the podcast episode 16 when I was talking to Max, I was briefly mentioned that I have seen something that the creation of something is like the highest level of intelligence or intelligence in action. And it's a combination that I derived that by seeing Bloom's taxonomy. However, it was also based on my observation, but I have to tell you, like, this is my subjective opinion. So it's not substantiated by a deep amount of research or a deep body of research. However, this is like my observation, and this is how I perceive people that are highly intelligent or not. But as I said, like, this is my worldview in that sense, my bias. So don't take it as the gospel. So, and what is interesting to see with that is the following. As you can see, like remembering and then understanding, these are the bottom layers. But most people, and I don't want to judge here, but it's just my observation, most people are remembering facts and stating facts. But there are even less people understanding what these information are in comparison, because there must be a possibility to, let's say, to compare it. Then we are already in analyzing, for instance, but also applying it. And when you remember, we had this podcast with Manu Kapoor. He was also like the biggest challenge the big three challenges of learning is, on the one hand, remembering, so that you can remember a list of things, a sequence, how to prepare a meal. Then is the understanding, the conceptual understanding, and then is transfer. Transfer is also the ability to learn a skill in a particular field and understanding how you can move this particular understanding into another field. I can give you a great example about in marketing, for instance. If you understand marketing, you can, for instance, like have a certain recipe for online marketing. If you understand, if you are in remembering, then you have, like, for instance, the marketing strategy of one particular company in mind, and you will apply it to the next company. So you remember it and you will apply it exactly in the sequence, in the amount of this like recipe, exactly like it's written. However, if you combine this knowledge, or if you would transfer it to something else, and you don't have like a conceptual understanding of marketing as a whole, meaning that you understand how the whole sequence works, marketing is all about, and how it changed basically in a different business, you cannot transfer it. But more important is like conceptual understanding and transfer. So, but here in this framework, we have also analyzing, evaluate, and create. And the interesting thing where I feel like, and this is also like something I prepared already before, is AI is really good in everything that is in these three layers, like remembering, understanding, also conceptual understanding, applying. It's a bit challenging depending on the task. There are certain tasks where AI is particularly good. For instance, organizing information. Analyzing, it can analyze, but there is a bias. Evaluate, this is, for instance, creating criticism, comparing something and creating original criticism as something, why it's great or why it's not great. And then the ultimate thing is creating something new from scratch. And as you can see, and this is where I want to show you where we have like this overlapping of a super reality. Super reality is something that is created. Super reality of AI and AI as a reality is, on the one hand, we always talk about that we are very, very near of, like, let's say, human level intelligence. In particular, very narrow fields, it might be the case. And what is really important to see, like, there are certain different AIs now in play. Of course, every AI application tool has different architecture and so forth. But the most, let's say, the breakthrough that we have in the last couple of years are chatbots. And the way that they are working is basically they are trained on a large data set of text. They derive understanding due to the context of text. And the next thing that they are doing is basically they predict based on the text that you have entered or the prompt you have entered, they predict what the next thing that will come. So there is no inherent understanding. They're just understanding the patterns of like the syntax of the written word. So where the interesting breakthrough comes is, although it's just that, the interesting breakthrough is that since they understand the whole, let's say, human language, they can derive logic from it. But it's not a, like, let's say, holistic understanding. It's more a, they have this rule set, but AI is at this point of time, there's no a inherent understanding. It's just a understanding of the rule set itself. And so they can derive the meaning of the logic. I'm not sure whether I explain it right, but I can give you an example why that is. So for instance, we have everybody that is working with AI have experienced hallucination. And hallucination comes exactly from that, because they predict certain outcomes based on your prompt. And sometimes they are just totally wrong, but their prediction or this neural net was in that moment predicting, oh, the most likely thing that comes next is that. And then in certain cases, it hallucinates and it's something completely wrong. This is what I mean, that it derives the logic from the written word, not the underlying principle itself. And this is also where I believe there is like something why they will, or AI is not really able to reach certain intelligence with, let's say, with that architecture, with that breakthrough, and with that generation of AI that we have at this point of time. This doesn't mean that going forward it will get better. It doesn't mean that we will eventually reach human level intelligence. And there's also certain other things, for instance, like certain things like a machine learning, which is nothing else than handling a huge, large set of data and combine it and derive logic or derive meaning out of these huge sets of data. And when this is combined with reinforced learning, it's basically you have these large data sets that are analyzed, so machine learning, and compared, and then the new meaning that is used is then compared to the next version of itself. So it's basically a machine that is learning based on their old version, and it's out-competing always its next predecessor. I'm not sure whether I explained it clear enough, but there's a difference. I think machine learning is something that is really, really great for things like this example we had with what we have seen, for instance, Michael and Synergy. The reason being is you have a large set of data and it derives meaning based on an architecture or based on a rule set. And this is something extremely great. And when you can apply it in a short amount of time, you can calculate things that were before not able to calculate it. I think these things, this will increase with time and they will get better and better and better and better. And in particular, if we solve the whole challenge of like normalizing data. What does this mean? Normalizing data is basically making data comparable. I can give you an example. If you have wearable, let's say Whoop strap, and you have an Apple Watch, the data set, maybe they might have like HRV and they might have also your heartbeat and so forth. But the way they derive this data and they calculate it and they store the data might not be totally comparable with Whoop. But if you can combine it in a way that you have both this data set and organize it in an understandable way, so it's normalized, then we have also like another problem that is solved, because all this either is machine learning or the large language models, they all have this common thing that they need a large amount of data in order to work properly and work sufficiently great. So, of course, there's another breakthrough that was made, and this was by Grok, by introducing synthetic data. So synthetic data is nothing else that the data set they use to train the AI on is created by artificial data sets. However, also as synthetic data has their drawbacks. But nevertheless, long intro, what I want to come to is there is a research paper done by these people, and the crazy and the very interesting thing is they wanted to understand and see how good is AI in comparison to a human to complete certain tasks. And one thing that is totally interesting for me to see is it exposes where the reality and the super reality of AI lies at this point of time. And we didn't even spoke about like one of the biggest challenges in AI that get mostly forgotten by investors is the huge amount of energy that is needed in order to power these data centers to have and besides of the data centers, also the GPUs that are needed for the calculations of and to run this AI models. There's also a total different set of problems that need to be solved. And one of the reasons we have now a, let's say, not shortage, but kind of a shortage of RAM is also derived by the huge like hype of AI. Well, and yeah, coming back to the study, and they compared, for instance, different projects or different jobs like data analysis, animated video, video game development, scientific documentations, and architecture, and so forth. And the interesting thing, so I go into this study. I will link all these things, like in particular the research paper. I will link them in the description of this podcast, so you can access them yourself and spend far more time if you want to. So these are the examples on, let's see. So, and you can see this automation, this is the automation rate, and they have even the latest, no, this is not the latest version of Claude, but I think the second, I thought they had the latest, nevertheless, but it could be the latest. Nevertheless, but it's sufficient recent enough with the models. But as you can see, 100% is the rate of completion. And you can see that all these like big AI models are at this point of time. Here, there are less than 10%. The best are around this area, which is close to 4%, even less than that. And the interesting thing was that most of the work was incomplete or corrupted and so forth. Let me show you some examples that you can see, but they are also like successful tasks. So for instance, as you can see here, this was like deliverable of data visualization. And as you can see, like the AI version was even better in these cases. And as you can see, and if you come back to what I have shown you about like the different levels of cognition and different levels of ability of thinking, this is totally what is now easily done with AI. And as you can see, but there are also like different projects where the results were like not really good. And let me show you one of the examples. There's also another example where the AI deliverable was comparable to a human task or was even better. And as you can see, like there are certain specific things AI is particularly good at. The results are very, very good. So, and then you can see, for instance, we have here an uncompleted project, and one was like the input of like to create a visualization or let's say a prototype of earbuds. And as you can see, like create in short a 3D product demo of aesthetics earbuds with an example. And as you can see, like this is what a human has delivered. And this is what AI has delivered. And what's also interesting, like these jobs was based on a job platform Fiverr. Yeah, that on the job platform at Fiverr, and the jobs was in average for a price of $700. And as you can see, the AI didn't deliver it fully. However, the humans did. There are even more examples, and as you can see, like where very effective is in these three things. And AI is already like really good of analyzing, in some cases applying as well. But if you can focus on these, the last three, you are still good, at least for my prediction, but don't hold me accountable for that. In order to have these properly developed, you have to grow through all the others. And as I said, like, this is a framework. It's not end of all be all, but I feel like it's a very robust framework based on my life experience, based on what I have observed, and also all the talks I have had with all these experts, in particular when I compare it with what was shared with Lisa, and also in particular with Manu Kapoor. And yeah, I think that was interesting for me to see, and also to understand that, yeah, we have the pressure from AI, and I still believe it's an enabler. I still believe there's a ton of like extremely great applications that we will see coming out from that. However, at this point of time, and even in the next year, I don't see AI be up at this part that it's a total game changer. It will change. It will change a lot of things, and I still believe like it will increase productivity, and we will see companies that are doing certain things with 3,000 employees that are comparable with a company that have 30,000 employees, if they have a fully integrated AI layer in all the processes, and the culture is like fully integrated in that. And I think that reflects also what I have seen with that study as well. Coming to the next topic I wanted to show you, and was the whole paper with from Steven Kotler. The whole paper, so the gist of it was basically what they have analyzed, because just to have a rundown or create more context of why Steven Kotler has these data to run these kind of studies and research, is he has a training company called Pro Research Collectives, and based on all their clients, they have gathered this data and published this recent paper. And the conclusion is that if you experience flow, it will help you to have more plasticity, neuroplasticity, and help you to derive to a better state of mental health and mood regulation, all these like beneficial things. And so I wanted to have more, let's say, dive deeper why that is. And it was very interesting to see that PTSD, flow, and also a psychedelic experience have certain things that are quite similar and certain things that are a bit different. And one thing that was super interesting, they have created this, let's say, they have created this scenario in how they tested it. It was basically a bike rider who was in like a very particular situation where a car crossed him, and he needed to perform very like moves, very particular moves in order to save his life. And in one case, the driver experienced flow through the flow triggers that happen to be like the typical things of like risk, novelty, increased focus, and also the shutdown of certain other parts of your brain. And the interesting thing was that in one case, the driver experienced flow, and in the other thing, the driver experienced a PTSD like state that left him traumatized and in distress. And the interesting thing was the difference between experiencing flow and PTSD, or this pre-PTSD trauma, was that in one case, it was that flow is more distinct in terms of the feeling of total control, that I'm in control in the situation. So the driver experienced this like close call in a way that he was in this experience where he skillfully used his bike to avoid an accident, and he felt a positive way of stress. It's basically learned powerfulness versus in like pre-PTSD, it's associated with learned helplessness, so a loss of power. And the interesting thing is that although this is the difference, like the post-growth of trauma and post-flow effect are very, very similar. So in both cases, you have this plasticity driving states, these high impact states, and adaptive stress or eustress. He called it eustress, is like positive stress. And that's very interesting to see that in both cases, you will end up like this post-growth PTSD, increased meaning, empathy, motivation, grit, environmental awareness that are in both cases in PTSD and also pre-PTSD or traumatic events, and also in flow are the same. But the difference is this learned powerfulness, the experience of total control versus the experience of the loss of control, which is very interesting. That is so vastly different experience that in both cases can lead to powerful outcomes down the line. And one particular thing, it was not mentioned, but I believe like in the other ways, probably the one reason is, or one is more positive, is the way that in the state of flow, the experience is more towards, of course, the experience is positive, and probably the experience later will this is it, this is my interpretation, will probably, let's say, be usable in a better way. And in the other experience, it might be maybe related to more traumatic or avoidant behavior. But this is like my interpretation. And I have to tell you, this is also one of my goals, to have Michael once again on the podcast, because he is also very much engaged into embodied cognition, and I would love to ask him about that in specific, because I couldn't derive it from the research paper. And how these research paper are always like created is like you don't come up with like a lot of different conclusions, rather like prove or disprove one particular thing. And then also one of the difference was that in terms of psychedelics, that these psychedelics was more a difference, that psychedelics is something that was added to you. So this is my interpretation. And therefore also the experience is similar, although the trigger is a different thing, because in PTSD and also in flow, there are certain triggers that come from action. And but in the similarities is like in all these cases, there are large networks in the brain that can be very rapidly rewired or new organized. And you have in both cases like this alternation of time perception and also the dissolution of your own consciousness also. So for instance, out of body experience, or you don't have this self-awareness that you are this, like rather being embodied in the whole experience as itself. Yeah, so up to the next topic, I think that wraps it up. And since we are now, let's say, discussed one of like the most important triggers for plasticity, I want to also discuss another topic, and this comes back to the whole social media discussion. In particular, from my perspective, my opinion is already set. I think it's a net negative, social media in combination with smartphones, if the usage is not closely, let's say, monitored, or it's used in a discipline and in a way that is very disciplined, in a way very when you use it in a let's say frame that is not in a disciplined way, to use social media in a very disciplined way. And the reason being is, in particular, when it comes to children, I think that's the most important thing, to use like very, very rarely social media. And for me, there is no question that there is also a correlation of like the decline of mental health, in particular for underage children and other adolescents. And the interesting thing was, first of all, Jonathan Haidt showed this research paper, and I think that's also a very positive thing to see, that we have now more research coming up trying to understand the correlation and also prove it from a scientific point of view, because there are certain, let's say, voices that still have like their, let's say, their reservation whether this is the truth. For me, there is no question, and there is a clear evidence if you're looking for that. And one thing that is this one paper, reducing social media use decreases loneliness regardless of levels of social comparison in youth with anxiety. And the interesting thing here was the way this was conducted. So they had 260 participant who have already like certain problems with anxiety and depression symptoms. And what they have done is basically they heavily restricted their social media use. And one particular, let's say, positive argument that was also used from Meta's own research was that although they admitted there are certain populations or a certain group of people have more like this symptoms of distress and a less enjoyable experience with social media, they could show with this paper that regardless of the gender, that's also very important, that it has a positive effect on loneliness, because also instinctively, because social media is connecting people, that you can argue that very much, and it makes sense that you can tell, yeah, I have the possibility to be connected with thousands of people. But interesting enough, in like our brain or how we perceive it is more that we perceive more loneliness and more comparison and anxiety and all these things. And they can prove it very, very greatly. And it's a great paper. I recommend to read it. And it is also encapsulate what they have as two, like, let's say, competing questions which they try to solve or prove. And one is like the historic trend question in that sense is, what was the rapid spread of smartphones and social media in the early 2010s major contribution cause for the rise of adolescence, depression, anxiety, and self-harm in the US or other Western countries? Which from my perspective, this is totally something that is for me, it's already proved. And then on the other hand, we have, like, as they said, like Times Alliance and mental health curves changed dramatically. So if you want to see that, go to the Sapiens Lab. They have this research report, like I think the name is Current State of Mental Health in the World. And you can see like very great detail in data. So I really highly recommend this report. And then on the other hand, we have product safety question is social media safe for today's children and adolescents? If our average teen spent around 5 hours per day, oh my God. I mean, let that sink in. 5 hours, that's a huge amount. On those platforms, are we exposing developing brains to unreasonable levels of risk? Which I highly, highly think that this is the case. So, and reducing social media use decreases loneliness and improves well-being. And as you can see, like this research paper showed it. And I think this article, Mountains of Evidence, is also a very great read if you want to dive deeper into that. And and if you don't want to have the time maybe to read Anxious Generation, the whole book, I highly recommend that to you. And in particular, one of the funny things is also that it's basically using parts of Meta's own research to prove that point. So yeah, I highly recommend to take your time and read it in detail. As I said, I will link it in the description of this podcast, so you can do it by yourself. And once again, for me, this brings home the point that I wanted to do is, like, on the one hand, we have the ability and also the increased understanding of how the brain works, and we can use it for our advantage because we know the brain is very plastic, and we can see like the negative effect of it, we can see the positive effect of it. And I think to bring the whole episode home and the whole conclusion of it is we have a chance. AI is a net positive, as I said like last episode, and in particular we have the chance if we focus on these higher levels of cognition. And the higher levels of cognition need a function, an executive function, in order to experience flow, in order to experience like high levels of brain plasticity that is induced by you and used for what you want. And that's the biggest difference. And it's interesting, and also to see that in the difference between PTSD is like you have this learned helplessness, and the opposite of flow, or the difference in flow, was that you have like the learned powerfulness. So the learned powerfulness. So in this case, like this is mirroring what we can see between PTSD and between flow. So flow is you are inducing, or you are using whatever you want to do, and in PTSD it's happening to you. So you can see the analogy like in social media. You get captured when you don't use it particularly how you want to use it, and then brain plasticity is working against you, and then you are in this, like, let's say, victim mode, learned helplessness, or you induce it by yourself. So I think you had a good time and you learned something. Stay tuned. Next episode will be a surprising guest, but I'm looking forward to this guest in particular. This will be an amazing conversation, totally new insights, and it's totally related to what we have seen right now. So I think these 2 episodes are the best setup for the upcoming episode. So stay tuned and have a good time. See you. Bye-bye.